The sun peeked over the tops of the neatly trimmed hedges, illuminating the rows of identical mailboxes in Harmony Heights, a suburban neighborhood in the western United States. This was a place where houses seemed to come from the same mold, identical facades distinguished only by subtle paint variations. American flags fluttered gently on porches, patriotic lawn ornaments sat in flower beds, and each yard was painstakingly maintained. Across the road, a small communal garden served as a shared space for residents, offering a modest gazebo and tidy rows of plants. Among these carefully manicured homes was the Prescott residence, a modest two-story house with a white picket fence. Inside, 10-year-old Lily Prescott worked diligently on her newest art project. She had always been an imaginative child. Her bedroom walls were lined with handmade paper mobiles, hand-drawn pictures of animals, and a shelf full of painted rocks that resembled every creature from cartoon puppies to whimsical fairies. On that bright morning, Lily was applying a final layer of acrylic paint to a small stone shaped like a turtle. She had spent the last week painting stones with various cheerful designs: sunflowers, rainbows, smiley faces, and tiny insects. Her plan was to create a pet rock display along the edge of the communal garden's walkway, hoping to bring a touch of color and joy to the otherwise uniform suburban scene. In Harmony Heights, the Homeowners Association, HOA, held a significant amount of influence. While many residents appreciated the structure and order provided by the HOA, there was one member whose personality had taken a turn for the authoritarian in recent months. Her name was Linda Farnett, though most people in the neighborhood privately referred to her by the nickname Karen. Linda, or Karen, was in her mid-50s, with sharply styled brown hair that she dyed religiously to hide any sign of gray. She had an air of rigid poise about her and possessed the uncanny ability to spot even the tiniest violation of HOA guidelines from half a block away. Lily's mother, Meredith Prescott, peeked into her daughter's bedroom. "Are you almost ready, sweetheart? The sun's up, and if we head over to the garden now, we can find the perfect spot for your rocks before it gets too busy." Lily carefully placed the turtle stone in a small box filled with tissue paper. "I'm ready, Mom. Let me just get my bag." She gathered her stone collection, about 15 of them in total, and headed downstairs, brimming with excitement. Moments later, Lily and Meredith strolled across the street toward the communal garden. The walkway leading to the garden had been crafted with tan pavers. On one side stood a row of rose bushes, and on the other, a small patch of empty mulch that had once been used for seasonal decorations. Lily knelt on the grass, her ponytail swaying as she arranged the rocks in a line. One stone resembled a bumblebee with whimsical stripes, another showcased a bright orange tabby cat. Each piece was painted with an enthusiastic mixture of vibrant colors. Meredith knelt beside her daughter to help place the stones so that passers-by could easily admire them. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass. The morning was so peaceful that neither mother nor daughter noticed a figure lurking on a nearby porch, coffee mug in hand, posture stiff. As Linda Farnett surveyed Lily's new display from her vantage point, her lips pursed into a line of displeasure. She mentally cataloged this rock arrangement as an unapproved alteration to common space. In her mind, no matter how well-intentioned or cute, these painted stones were a threat to the sanctity of the HOA's carefully maintained appearance guidelines. Still, Linda decided to wait before intervening. She intended to file a formal complaint soon enough. As Lily stood up, her face aglow with pride, Linda quietly set down her coffee and headed indoors, already composing a scathing email in her head. Little did Lily realize that her simple act of bringing color and joy to the communal space would spark the kind of uproar that Harmony Heights hadn't seen in years. Harmony Heights had not always been the cloistered suburban stronghold of rules and uniformity that it was now. Decades ago, it was merely a stretch of farmland on the outskirts of a growing city. Over time, developers recognized an opportunity. They snapped up the land, built houses in neat rows, and pitched it to aspiring homeowners as a family-friendly neighborhood with a quaint American spirit. From the beginning, the Homeowners Association was established to keep everything in pristine condition and maintain property values. In theory, it was meant to unify neighbors under a shared sense of care and responsibility. In practice, it depended largely on who sat on the HOA board. When Linda Farnett moved in 4 years prior, she presented herself as the quintessential helpful volunteer, someone who would ensure the community thrived. She offered to join committees, organized small events, and donated to local causes. Most people admired her efficiency and clear communication style. But as the months passed, it became evident that Linda interpreted the rules in the strictest possible terms. She campaigned to remove unsightly decorations from front lawns, enforced guidelines on acceptable mailbox colors, and even mandated specific days for trash can placement. Her newsletters were peppered with references to clauses and subsections of the HOA bylaws that no one else bothered to read. Slowly but surely, Linda Farnett transformed from a supportive neighbor to a self-appointed warden of order. In the heart of the neighborhood, though, Lily's small row of painted rocks looked innocent and charming enough, at least to most. On the second morning after Lily placed them, as she checked on her creations, she found a folded piece of paper tucked under one of the stones. Notice of possible violation. To whom it may concern. According to Section 3, subsection C of the Harmony Heights Common Area Guidelines, any and all decorations added to public property without prior HOA approval must be removed. Please remove the painted rocks immediately to avoid further action. We appreciate your cooperation in keeping Harmony Heights a clean and orderly environment. At the bottom, in bold, was, Sincerely, Linda Farnett, HOA board member. Lily's heart sank. She clutched the note, worry creasing her small brow. When Meredith arrived to pick her up after an afternoon at a friend's house, Lily silently handed over the paper. One glance, and Meredith felt the chill of dread. She remembered hearing neighbors' complaints about Linda Farnett's petty citations. One family received a warning because their garden gnome was too large. Another was threatened with a fine because a child had drawn a giant chalk rainbow on the sidewalk. Meredith's first instinct was to reassure her daughter. Sweetheart, it's going to be okay. These rocks aren't harming anyone. They're adding color. People love them. Lily's lower lip trembled. But, do we have to take them away? Meredith exhaled slowly. Let's talk to your dad and think this through. If it's a rule, maybe we need to ask for an exception or get permission. Sometimes these things can be worked out if we follow the right steps. A quiet determination filled Lily's eyes. I don't want them to go, Mom. I've worked really hard painting them. Meredith gently ruffled her daughter's hair. Then we'll do our best to keep them here. Who knows, maybe we can convince the board that your artwork is worth keeping. Yet, as she spoke the words, Meredith felt a pang of uncertainty. The HOA's rules were notoriously rigid. And if Linda Farnett had decided this was a violation, it was unlikely she would back down easily. The seeds of conflict were firmly planted. Now, it was only a matter of time before this small dispute grew into something much larger. News in Harmony Heights traveled fast, especially when it involved HOA matters. Before long, neighbors began to talk about Lily's painted rocks. Some, like Mrs. Clark, an elderly resident who found the stones delightful, voiced their support in casual chats over the fence. Others, who preferred to keep a low profile and avoid conflict, shrugged and said, if it breaks the rules, it breaks the rules. But many felt that this particular violation seemed too trivial to warrant removal. One late afternoon, as Lily and Meredith were returning from grocery shopping, they saw a cluster of neighbors near the communal garden. Joan Bradbury, a friendly woman who often organized potlucks, beckoned them over. Meredith, Lily, we were just admiring the rock display. She pointed to the cheerful row of stones, each featuring bright animals and plants. What do you think? Lily asked shyly. They're adorable, Joan replied. I don't see how they could hurt anybody or anything. A second neighbor, Kevin Morales, chimed in. I actually think they enhance the garden path. I've seen people stop to look at them, and it brings a smile to their faces. Meredith felt a rush of relief. That's so kind of you to say. Linda Farnett sent us a violation notice, though. Eyes rolled around the little group. It was a well-known story. Linda Farnett had taken the role of HOA enforcer to extremes. Joan exclaimed, Well, that's just her usual, isn't it? She's always on the lookout for the smallest reason to impose a new rule or slap someone with a notice. Kevin nodded in agreement. I get that the HOA wants uniformity, but seriously, painted rocks? They're not exactly an eyesore. It's not like Lily's installed neon lights on her lawn. Lily's eyes sparkled with hope. I'm so happy people like them, she said softly. I just wanted to make the garden more colorful. Joan placed a reassuring hand on Lily's shoulder. You did, honey. You certainly did. Meanwhile, a few houses down, Linda Farnett's blinds shifted as she watched the informal gathering. She had already flagged the presence of newly placed unauthorized decorations in her official binder. A binder that contained spreadsheets of every recorded infraction, complete with dates, photos, and references to the HOA's thick rulebook. She told herself it wasn't personal. Rules were rules. She was simply upholding the guidelines that the entire community agreed upon. But deep down, Linda relished the sense of control this role gave her. Setting her binder aside, Linda considered her strategy. She would send an official letter next, one that detailed potential fines if the rocks weren't removed. While she wouldn't mind a conversation with Meredith or Lily in principle, Linda believed that communal harmony required strict adherence to codes. Exceptions led to chaos. After all, if Lily's rocks were allowed, what would be next? Balloon arches, unapproved benches, or gazebos painted in rainbow stripes? No, best to stamp out the small rule breakers before they grew into something unmanageable. As the neighbors dispersed, Meredith felt more encouraged by their support. Yet she also recognized a looming storm. Linda's resolve was not to be underestimated. If the violation escalated, it could mean fines, or worse, for the Prescott family. For a split second, she wondered if it was worth the fight. Then she glanced at Lily, who looked so proud and hopeful, and decided they would not give up so easily. A few days passed uneventfully, until the Saturday morning that brought the official letter. It arrived in a crisp, white envelope emblazoned with the HOA logo. Printed on expensive stationery, it outlined the infraction in formal, chilly language. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Prescott, we regret to inform you that, following a thorough review of the Harmony Heights bylaws, the painted rocks placed by your child in the communal garden path represent an unauthorized decorative installation. As such, you are required to remove these items by the end of the week. Failure to comply may result in a fine of up to $100 per day, as permitted under Article 2 of the HOA's enforcement policy. We value your cooperation and strive to maintain the consistent aesthetic of our community. Sincerely, Linda Farnett, on behalf of the HOA board. Meredith's stomach twisted in knots as she read it at the kitchen table. Lily, perched on a stool, had just finished her breakfast when she spotted the HOA letter's header. She looked up at her mother with concern. They really want to fine us? Meredith nodded solemnly. It looks that way, kiddo. A flash of hurt crossed Lily's face, but she pressed her lips together in resolve. But that's not fair. Fair or not, we have to deal with it, Meredith said. She walked across the living room, crumpling the letter slightly in her hand. She called out for her husband. Peter. Peter, Lily's father, was an even-tempered engineer who disliked confrontation. When he read the letter, he frowned and said, Maybe we should just gather the rocks and bring them home before this escalates any further. I don't like the idea of paying a fine. Meredith exchanged a glance with Lily. She saw the heartbreak in her daughter's eyes. This project was more than a mere decorative flourish. It was Lily's personal investment in the neighborhood, a small way to spread joy. We can at least try to appeal, Meredith suggested. We'll go to the HOA meeting next week. We can present our case for letting Lily keep her display. Peter exhaled. All right, but you know Linda. She can be pretty rigid. I know, but I've seen some neighbors backing us up. Maybe we can sway the rest of the board. If we don't, then we'll remove the rocks, Meredith conceded, trying to keep the peace. Over the next few days, Meredith and Lily talked to a few supportive neighbors, gathering informal statements that might help at the meeting. Joan Bradbury encouraged them to fight for the freedom to add some creativity to the community, while Kevin Morales offered to speak on Lily's behalf if needed. When the evening of the HOA meeting arrived, the Prescott family entered the community center to find a small crowd already seated in folding chairs. At the front sat the 5-person HOA board, which included Linda Farnett. She wore a tailored blazer, her posture impossibly straight. Alongside her were the other board members, some of whom looked sympathetic, others more difficult to read. When Lily's agenda item finally came up, Meredith stood. She explained how Lily had spent weeks painting the stones, that the display was neat, unobtrusive, and brought the community together. She asked for a special exception, or at least a reconsideration of the rule. Linda's expression remained impassive. We appreciate your child's creativity, she said in a clipped tone, but the communal garden is a shared space. If we open the door to one individual's decorative choices, we run the risk of losing consistent community standards. Furthermore, the stones could pose a tripping hazard if placed in large numbers. Murmurs spread through the crowd, some in agreement, but many in disbelief. Lily clutched Meredith's hand, her eyes brimming with tears of frustration. She wanted to speak, but nervousness held her back. Peter raised his hand. We're willing to assume any liability. If someone trips, We'll be responsible. But honestly, the rocks are small and placed off to the side. Linda pursed her lips. That's not an officially recognized agreement. The HOA stands firm on the matter of unapproved decor. My recommendation is that we proceed with the fine unless the rocks are removed promptly. One board member, Susan Temple, tentatively spoke up. Linda, let's not be too harsh. The child's project is really quite sweet. Could we at least table the fine for a month and see if there are any actual complaints beyond this technicality? Linda's jaw set. She disliked being challenged. Still, she recognized that an outright dismissal of a fellow board member's suggestion would be seen as too abrasive. All right, she said, eyes narrowed. We can postpone the fine for 4 weeks. But the rocks must be reviewed for safety and aesthetic alignment. She paused and added pointedly. I must note that if the child's display fails to meet standards, immediate removal will be required without further discussion. Though it wasn't the victory Meredith and Lily had hoped for, they had at least bought some time. As the meeting adjourned, Linda swept her papers into a folder. She offered Meredith and Lily a tight-lipped nod before marching toward the exit. In her mind, the matter was decided. She would ensure these brightly painted stones wouldn't be a permanent fixture in her neighborhood. A humid dusk settled over Harmony Heights. Cicadas buzzed in the distance, and porch lights flickered on. Lily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about her stones, worried what might happen next. She had already heard rumors that Linda, or Karen, as the neighbors privately called her, had gone around taking pictures of each rock, presumably gathering evidence. Despite the extension granted by the board, Linda did not ease her pressure tactics. Within days, she circulated a new HOA notice referencing safety concerns and aesthetic uniformity. She singled out the painted rocks, describing them as an uncontrolled, accumulating hazard. This turned out to be the tipping point for many neighbors who now felt Linda was overreacting. Tensions reached a boiling point when Linda took matters into her own hands, literally. One late afternoon, Lily decided to add a few more painted stones to fill a small gap near the rose bushes. Meredith supervised from a short distance away, chatting with Joan Bradbury. Linda, wearing a sour expression, marched across the street armed with a garden hose. She attached it to the spigot outside the community tool shed, turned the faucet, and unleashed a torrent of water along the mulched area. Lily looked up, startled. The sudden rush of water kicked up soil, creating a muddy slurry that drenched the painted stones and threatened to dislodge them. The carefully arranged line of artwork scattered as water swept loose pebbles and the newly painted stones alike. One rock shaped like a bright yellow pineapple tumbled into a puddle, the paint smearing. Linda's face was set in determined fury. "These belong in your house, not in public space," she shouted. "We can't have random objects all over the garden. Stones are not decor, young lady." Meredith rushed forward, her voice trembling. "Linda, stop. What are you doing?" She tried to grab the hose, but Linda yanked it away, spraying more water in her attempts to hold Meredith off. By now, neighbors emerged from their homes or peered out of windows, drawn by the commotion. A small crowd gathered, with many gasping at the sight of Linda forcibly flooding a child's innocent art display. Lily stood there helplessly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Joan Bradbury intervened, placing a hand on Linda's arm. "Linda, that's enough. You're being ridiculous. Put the hose down." Linda finally relented and switched off the faucet. She flung the hose onto the grass, its metal nozzle clanking against the ground. "I'm just cleaning up the walkway," she spat, attempting to reclaim some veneer of normalcy. "This is common property, and it was unsightly." "Unsightly," Kevin Morales echoed, stepping forward with disbelief. "You're out of line, Linda. That's a little girl's art you just destroyed. How could you do that?" "The board gave us an extension," Meredith reminded her, voice shaking with anger. "We still had a month to address this." Linda's eyes blazed. "And I have a right to maintain order. No one said more rocks could appear. This neighborhood is not a free-for-all. If I see an ongoing violation, I'll address it, extension or not." A hush fell over the group. Lily sobbed quietly, kneeling near the muddied remains of her stones, which were smeared and scattered. Meredith glared at Linda through tears of her own. "You've gone too far this time." Linda only lifted her chin. "We'll see about that." And with that final, arrogant remark, she stomped back to her house, leaving the rest of the neighborhood stunned by her cruelty. The aftermath of Linda's hostile act rippled through Harmony Heights. Within hours, word had spread. The woman nicknamed Karen had deliberately destroyed a child's art project in the communal garden. Most residents were appalled. Even those who typically supported strict HOA standards felt that Linda had crossed a line. Peter helped Lily collect the scattered stones, many of which now had their vibrant paint stripped away by the muddy water. Some were chipped, and a few had vanished entirely into the muck. Standing by the garden, Lily was heartbroken. "All my work, gone," she murmured. Her eyes were red from crying. She had spent countless hours decorating each stone with care. Meredith knelt beside her daughter, brushing splotches of mud off one rock that still bore faint traces of a painted ladybug. "We can repaint them," she offered gently. "We can make them even better than before." Lily sniffled, trying to be brave. "Karen will just destroy them again." Joan Bradbury spoke up, gently resting a hand on Lily's shoulder. "We won't let her. Not if we all stand together. Mark my words. I'll rally the neighborhood if that's what it takes." Kevin Morales agreed. "Yeah, we can't let one person bully everyone else into submission." They decided to meet that evening at the Bradbury's house, inviting anyone who wished to discuss a civil response to Linda's actions. To their surprise, nearly 20 people showed up, including folks who normally avoided any form of conflict. The atmosphere was charged with anger, but also a determination to take positive steps. Standing in the Bradbury's cozy living room, Meredith addressed the group. "Thank you all for coming. Lily and I are overwhelmed by your support. Honestly, what Linda did was awful, but we want to handle this the right way. We want to show that creativity and kindness can coexist with HOA standards." A man named George Ross, a retired teacher, suggested, "What if we gather even more painted rocks from all the kids in the neighborhood and line them up in the garden? Strength in numbers. Then if Linda tries something again, she'll be interfering with everyone's children, not just Lily." Several heads nodded in agreement, while a few looked nervous. "But Linda is on the HOA board," one woman reminded them. "She can fine us, or worse." Joan waved her hand dismissively. "We can't keep living in fear. Besides, Linda is only one vote on the board. The others might be swayed if enough residents show they want the display." Kevin chimed in. "We can also look into the official guidelines. If we can interpret the rules in a way that allows such decorative touches, especially if it's near the rose bushes and not obstructing anything, maybe we can argue it's not a violation." Then Lily, who had been sitting quietly, raised her small voice. "What if we make something that helps people feel happy when they walk by? Like, I've seen kindness rock gardens before where people paint positive messages on stones. It's not just about the pictures. They write words like hope, love, or be kind. It could be something the whole neighborhood does together." A collective hush fell, and then smiles began to spread around the room. It was a perfect idea. Turn the negative experience into a community bonding project. Joan clapped her hands. "That's wonderful, Lily. We can make a bigger statement. We stand for kindness over bullying." Meredith looked at her daughter with pride. "We'll need to plan carefully. We should invite everyone to contribute a painted rock and place them all together on a designated day. That way, it's not just one person's project. It belongs to the whole neighborhood." Several neighbors volunteered to organize. Kevin offered to design flyers announcing a rock painting and kindness celebration. Joan promised to email details to the neighborhood's distribution list. They decided to hold the event next weekend by the gazebo, urging residents to bring any rock they wanted to decorate with a positive message or image. A sense of unity pulsed through the group. For once, people in Harmony Heights felt a genuine surge of camaraderie against the strict, fear-based culture that had built up under Linda Farnett's watchful eye. Everyone recognized that Linda would oppose them, perhaps vigorously. Still, the neighbors were tired of living under her heavy-handed rule, and Lily's heartbreak had given them a spark of purpose. By the end of the night, they had a plan. Harmony Heights would soon see a transformation in its communal garden, and Linda Farnett, or Karen, as she was privately dubbed, would find that no amount of aggression could wash away this wave of collective goodwill. Preparations for the Kindness Rock Day spread quickly through Harmony Heights. Flyers appeared on mailboxes, pinned to bulletin boards, and handed out door to door by a few enthusiastic teenagers. The bright, cheerful invitations read, Join us for Kindness Rock Day. Where? Harmony Heights Communal Garden by the gazebo. When? Saturday, 10 a.m., 2 p.m. What? Paint a rock with a positive message or design. Let's create a permanent display of unity and kindness for our neighborhood. All ages welcome. Materials provided, or bring your own rocks. Meredith spent the week gathering large river stones from a local landscaping store, determined not to rely solely on whatever random rocks people could find. She wanted everyone to have plenty to paint. Neighbors pitched in by donating extra paints, brushes, and even foldable tables. All the while, Linda Farnett watched with growing indignation. She sent out a formal email to the HOA distribution list, warning that any large-scale additions to the common area still required official approval. Yet, for once, Linda's email was met with lukewarm or outright dismissive responses. Too many people were excited about the project to be deterred. The seeds of revolt had truly sprouted. When Saturday morning arrived, a wave of optimism permeated the neighborhood. Families, couples, and individuals of all ages made their way to the communal garden. A few canopies were set up to shade the tables laden with paints, brushes, and piles of smooth rocks. Children laughed and scurried around, while adults chatted and sipped iced tea. The sun shone bright and warm, as though smiling upon the gathering. Lily arrived early with Meredith, Peter, and Joan Bradbury. They began laying out the materials, double-checking that there were enough brushes. One by one, neighbors trickled in, each greeted with a cheerful welcome. Grab a seat, pick a rock, and start painting. Before long, the tables filled with people of various ages. A tall man in a baseball cap carefully painted the word hope against a rainbow background. A grandmother and her granddaughter giggled as they tried to paint tiny cats in pastel colors. A teenage boy quietly wrote, "Never give up," on his chosen rock. Laughter and chatter abounded. It was an event unlike anything Harmony Heights had seen in a long time. Spontaneous, creative, and full of genuine warmth. Lily was in her element, giving tips to younger children on how to mix colors or outline images. She felt a sense of purpose blossom within her. The heartbreak of seeing her own creations destroyed by Linda's hose was temporarily eclipsed by the delight of watching dozens of new stones come to life. Halfway through the event, Linda Farnett appeared, clipboard in hand. She stood on the edge of the crowd, her sharp eyes surveying the scene. A tight frown formed on her lips as she took in the colorful chaos. Deciding to make her presence known, she marched straight up to Meredith. "Meredith," Linda said tersely, "I see you've organized a gathering." She glanced around as if disapproving of the painted rocks strewn over tables. "I trust that you recall any final placement of these items in the communal garden is subject to HOA board approval." Meredith forced a polite smile. "This is a community event, Linda. People are simply painting rocks with positive messages. We haven't placed anything permanently yet, so there's no violation. We plan to discuss the final arrangement at the next board meeting." A flicker of annoyance passed over Linda's features. She had hoped to catch them in open defiance. "Very well," she muttered. "But be warned, this is not an official, sanctioned project. If you attempt to line them up again or create any structure without approval, you'll be in breach of the rules, and I will have to take appropriate action." Meredith's voice was firm. "We understand. We'll follow procedure. For now, people are just enjoying the painting. Surely that isn't against any regulation." Linda's eyes narrowed. For a moment, it looked as if she might say something sharper. Instead, she pivoted on her heel and walked away, returning to her car. The wind seemed to carry a collective sigh of relief once she was gone. As the day wound down, participants proudly showed off their colorful rocks. Hearts, flowers, uplifting words, cartoon characters, all reflecting the spirit of togetherness. Lily stood beside a table, staring wide-eyed at the sheer volume of painted stones. There had to be more than 100 of them. "Mom," Lily said softly, "this is more than I ever dreamed. Look at all the people who believe in this project." Meredith bent down to hug her daughter. "I know. I'm proud of you for inspiring it." Joan signaled for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming. We'll keep these painted stones safely stored until we can work with the HOA on a permanent display. We appreciate your positivity and support. This is what community looks like." Cheers and applause erupted. Harmony Heights had taken a step away from the shadow of Linda Farnett's overbearing reign, united by the simple notion that a few painted rocks could embody something powerful: kindness, creativity, and the shared pride of neighbors standing together. Over the following week, anticipation ran high in Harmony Heights. The next HOA board meeting loomed, and the entire neighborhood buzzed with questions. Would the board vote to allow the Kindness Rock Garden as a permanent fixture? Would Linda Farnett shut it down? Could the neighbors' collective voices tip the balance? On the evening of the board meeting, the community center was filled with more residents than usual. Some had never bothered to attend HOA meetings before, but Linda's destructive act and the rally around Lily's idea had changed things. People were determined to make their opinions heard. The 5 members of the HOA board took their seats at a long table on a small platform at the front. Linda Farnett sat in the center, flanked by Susan Temple and 3 other board members: Alan Rhodes, Patrice Leung, and Mark Waverly. Linda's expression revealed nothing as she stared out at the packed room. The agenda covered a few mundane items first: budget adjustments, landscaping contracts, and a short discussion about noise ordinances. Then, at last, it was time for the Kindness Rock Garden proposal. A hush fell over the audience. Susan Temple cleared her throat and addressed the crowd. As many of you know, there has been significant interest in creating a community-driven display of painted rocks in our communal garden. We have a formal proposal requesting the HOA's approval. The board will discuss and vote on whether to allow a permanent installment. Linda took the microphone next, her tone clipped. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that we have strict rules about decorations in common areas. Any large-scale addition requires board approval, which was not sought prior to the event held last weekend. This sets a dangerous precedent. From a seat in the first row, Meredith raised her hand. Susan nodded, allowing her to speak. With all due respect, Linda, the event last weekend was a rock painting day, not the permanent installation itself. That's why we're here tonight, to present this request for official approval to place the decorated stones in a defined section of the garden. Linda's eyes flicked over Meredith with an air of disapproval. Yes, well, I've reviewed the bylaws extensively. There is no explicit clause that allows for painted stones in the communal garden. We can't just rewrite the rules on a whim. A man in the back rose, George Ross, the retired teacher. Rules can be amended if the community supports it. That's precisely how HOAs adapt to evolving needs. Otherwise, we'd never allow anything new. Scattered applause followed. Linda looked annoyed but maintained her composure. That's true in principle. But let's discuss the practical concerns. These rocks could become projectiles if someone decides to move or throw them. There could be chipped paint polluting the soil, or they might pose a slip hazard. A woman stood up, Diane Evers, a landscaper by profession. I can speak to that. The paint used is non-toxic, and if we embed or cement the rocks in place in a designated border, they won't be loose projectiles or create slip hazards. There are ways to do this safely and attractively. A buzz of agreement filled the room. Linda glanced around, realizing she was losing control of the narrative. Even if that's possible, we have to protect property values. Some potential homebuyers might be put off by such unconventional decorations. It's crucial to consider the community's overall image. Now Kevin Morales stood, addressing the board. Don't you think homebuyers would be more drawn to a neighborhood that embraces creativity, unity, and positivity? This is a chance to distinguish ourselves, to show we're not just rows of identical houses. Cheers followed, louder this time. Linda frowned. She glanced at her fellow board members. Susan Temple looked sympathetic toward the neighbors, while Alan Rhodes wore a thoughtful expression. Patrice Leung tapped a pen against the table, clearly thinking. Mark Waverly drummed his fingers, looking slightly nervous about the rising tension. Susan gestured for quiet. Let's proceed in an orderly fashion. We've heard from several residents who support the proposal. Does anyone here wish to speak against it? Silence, save for a few coughs. Linda's face reddened, a flicker of frustration crossing her features as she realized she was essentially alone in her opposition. Still, she refused to go down without a fight. It's not about me being for or against it, she insisted. It's about adherence to the guidelines we all agreed to. We can't bend the rules for every fancy. Another voice spoke up. This time, an older gentleman named Richard Browning, widely respected for his fairness. Linda, if the bylaws are inadequate for a new situation, we adapt them. That's the purpose of having a voting process. So let's vote. Susan nodded, turning to the board. We have a motion on the table to approve the creation of a permanent kindness rock garden in the communal space. We propose that the rocks be securely embedded or otherwise installed to address safety concerns. We'll also require that paint used is non-toxic. Are we ready to vote? One by one, the board members cast their votes. Susan Temple voted yes. Alan Rhodes voted yes, citing the community's enthusiasm. Patrice Leung voted yes, referencing the thorough plan. Mark Waverly hesitated briefly, then voted yes. All eyes fell on Linda Farnett, the last to vote. She pressed her lips into a thin line. No, she stated firmly. But it was 4-1. A wave of applause and cheers erupted from the audience. Linda's face twisted with displeasure as the motion passed. The Kindness Rock Garden was officially approved. Lily, seated between Meredith and Joan, leapt up, throwing her arms in the air with a delighted squeal. The rest of the crowd erupted into celebratory chatter, ignoring Linda's sour expression. As the meeting adjourned, Linda quickly gathered her papers. Susan gave her a sympathetic look, but Linda brushed past her. She had rarely experienced defeat in her role, and the sting was palpable. Meanwhile, the Prescott family, along with many neighbors, filed out with triumphant smiles. Lily felt a surge of relief and excitement. At long last, her vision and the neighborhood's collective creativity could shine permanently in the communal garden. With the board's approval secured, the next step was to transform the painted stones into a lasting fixture. Neighbors volunteered to help create a low, decorative border using mortar along the edge of the walkway in the communal garden. The goal was to embed the painted rocks firmly, ensuring they wouldn't shift or cause hazards. On a bright Saturday morning, families gathered with shovels, mixing bins, bags of quick-setting cement, and trowels. Children scampered around, buzzing with excitement, while adults worked under the gentle direction of Diane Evers, the landscaper who had offered her expertise. Okay, Diane announced, clapping her gloved hands together. First, we smooth the top layer of mortar. Then we press each rock into place. We'll let it set, and voila, permanent Kindness Rock Garden. Lily watched eagerly as her father and Kevin Morales hauled bags of cement to the walkway. Joan Bradbury helped flatten the mortar, calling out cheerful instructions. Meredith guided younger kids in placing the rocks one by one, reading out the messages painted on them. Here's one that says, "Be brave," and another says, "We're in this together." At every step, laughter and chatter filled the air. The bright sun illuminated each rock's vibrant colors, from swirling blues to pops of orange and yellow. Lily painstakingly positioned her original designs, those that could be salvaged and repainted, near the center, so they would be a focal point. She even included the little turtle stone she had first imagined. Though some paint had peeled away, she had retouched it, renewing its cheerful details. As mid-afternoon approached, the mortar began to set. The row of stones curved gracefully along the garden path, forming a mosaic of color. It was far more striking than Lily had ever anticipated. The entire community's creativity was now on display, a testament to the power of unity and kindness. Linda Farnett stood at her window, blinds half drawn. She had refused to participate, ignoring the public invitation that had been sent to every resident. She couldn't believe how quickly the neighborhood had come together against her wishes. Even as she watched from afar, she felt a mix of resentment and helplessness. The mortar was drying, rendering this display permanent, beyond her control. The hours she had spent enforcing rules, issuing warnings, and sending stern notices suddenly felt hollow. For once, her authority had failed to quash what she deemed an unnecessary disturbance. Down at the garden, the final stone was placed with a gentle pat. A roar of applause followed. Children began scrawling their names in the small stretch of mortar still partially wet, leaving behind handprints and doodles. Diane guided them, so it wouldn't interfere with the rocks. "Ladies and gentlemen," Joan Bradbury proclaimed, "we now have a lasting tribute to kindness in Harmony Heights." Cheers rang out. Lily, feeling a small pang of disbelief, turned to her mother and father, hugging them tightly. All that sadness she felt when Linda destroyed her art had dissolved into gratitude. Meredith patted Lily's back. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought everyone together in a way that no one else has." As dusk descended, fairy lights strung around the gazebo twinkled, reflecting off the bright stones. The transformation of the communal garden was complete, showcasing an explosion of color in a place once dominated by monotony. For the first time in a long while, Harmony Heights felt truly harmonious. In the days that followed, the newly minted Kindness Rock Garden became an instant attraction in Harmony Heights. People who lived outside the neighborhood often stopped by to admire it, hearing about the unique display through friends or local social media groups. Children showed off the stones they'd painted to grandparents and visiting relatives. Some residents even began planting complimentary flowers around the mosaic border, further brightening the area. For Lily, the garden was a dream come true. Each morning before school, she'd run over to see her turtle rock, secure in its place, and read a few of the messages embedded around it. Smile every day, you are loved, spread joy. The positivity was contagious. Even casual walkers felt uplifted. The HOA board's next monthly newsletter featured an article on the garden. Although Linda Farnett remained staunchly opposed, the other members, led by Susan Temple, praised the project's uplifting spirit and congratulated the neighborhood on its collaborative efforts. One small paragraph explained that special exceptions to guidelines can be granted by majority vote for community benefit projects, subtly dismissing Linda's repeated objections. Linda, for her part, retreated from the center of neighborhood affairs. She didn't resign from the board. Her term still had another year, but she found her influence waning. The wave of goodwill spurred by the Kindness Rock Garden proved stronger than her attempts to enforce hyper-rigid rules. Whenever she tried to raise other petty complaints, the board politely suggested more pressing matters. Residents who once feared her fines now spoke openly about new ideas for making the neighborhood a friendlier place. Though Linda continued to oversee some HOA tasks, it was clear she had been marginalized by her own aggressiveness. Karen Farnett, as many called her behind closed doors, had inadvertently become the catalyst for a renewed sense of community. Ironically, by destroying Lily's initial display, she had brought everyone together in a way that no one expected. 1 year later, the Kindness Rock Garden was still going strong. Fresh coats of sealant protected the paint from weather damage, and every so often, a new rock found its way into the mosaic. It became a living, evolving testament to the power of unity over division. On a sunny afternoon during the next summer break, Lily strolled through the garden, now 11 years old and an inch taller. She paused at her favorite spot, tracing her fingers over the turtle stone's shell. It reminded her of how a simple idea, born in a little girl's bedroom, had brought warmth and color to an entire neighborhood. As she left, she spotted Linda Farnett across the street, peering out from behind her blinds. Their eyes met briefly. Linda gave a stiff nod, then turned away. Lily felt no animosity. She simply smiled to herself, reflecting on how something as small as a painted stone could spark such a monumental change. In the end, Harmony Heights had confronted a challenge that threatened its sense of togetherness. Through courage and cooperation, the residents forged a new path, quite literally set in stone. And if a passerby happened to wander through the communal garden on any given day, they'd witness not just an assortment of painted rocks, but a neighborhood's enduring pledge to choose kindness over hostility, no matter how forceful the opposition might be.